Picture this, 1921. A black man worth millions stands on Greenwood Avenue, watching airplanes circle overhead. But these aren't joyrides. They're dropping firebombs on his neighborhood. The pilots? Deputized by the city. The target? America's wealthiest black community. His name was O.W. Gurley. You've never heard of him. That's not an accident. Here's what they're terrified you'll discover. Between the 1890s and 1930s, black Americans built empires that made white elites nervous. Not just businesses' empires. Banks, newspapers, oil companies, luxury hotels, entire, thriving districts where black millionaires weren't anomalies. They were neighbors. In Tulsa, Durham, and across Mississippi, formerly enslaved people and their children were creating generational wealth within decades of emancipation. They weren't asking permission. They weren't waiting for handouts. They were dominating. And that was the problem. Because every black millionaire walking around in a three-piece suit, building hospitals, and buying property next to Rockefeller's estate was living proof that white supremacy's entire foundation was a lie. The system depended on one narrative. Black people were naturally inferior, incapable of civilization, destined for servitude. But when Black Wall Street had more millionaires per capita than most white neighborhoods, when black women out-earned white businessmen, when people born into slavery became philanthropists within a single generation, the lie fell apart. So the system did what it always does when threatened. It responded with violence, legislation, and something more insidious than both erasure. They burned the towns, stole the land, murdered the witnesses. Then they wrote history books as if none of it ever existed. Let me introduce you to 7 people they tried to bury. 1. Madam C.J. Walker, the woman who out-millionaired everyone. Born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 on a Louisiana plantation. Orphaned at 7. Married at 14. Widowed at 20 with a baby and no money. She washed clothes for $1 a day while her hair fell out from stress and toxic products. So she invented better ones. By 1910, Walker had built a hair care empire employing thousands of black women nationwide, giving them financial independence when their only other option was domestic servitude. By 1919, she was worth over $1 million, making her America's first self-made female millionaire. Not black female millionaire. Female millionaire. Period. She bought a mansion in upstate New York right next to John D. Rockefeller's estate. Not because she needed to be near him. Because she wanted him to see what black excellence looked like every morning when he opened his curtains. But here's what they did to her legacy. For decades, white historians either erased her completely or gave credit to everyone except her. Her white lawyer really ran the business. She just got lucky. Some textbooks gave her a single sentence. Because acknowledging that a black woman born into slavery had outbusinessed the captains of industry would require admitting something they couldn't afford to admit. 2. Annie Malone, the woman richer than the famous one. While Walker was becoming a household name, Annie Malone was even richer, and history buried her so deep most people have never heard of her at all. Born in 1869, orphaned as a child, built a hair care empire called Poro that made Walker's company look like a side hustle. At her peak, Malone was worth an estimated $14 million. She employed 75,000 people worldwide. She owned an entire city block in St. Louis, factory, school, theater, worker apartments, the works. Walker actually started as one of Malone's sales agents. Malone was the blueprint. But Malone made a fatal mistake. She was too generous. She gave millions to orphanages, funded black colleges, bankrolled civil rights organizations. Where her marriage fell apart in the 1920s, white lawyers and racist courts systematically drained her fortune through legal fees and judgments that would never have touched a white businesswoman. By 1957, most of her wealth was gone, and history had erased her so thoroughly that the innovations she pioneered got credited to others. 2 of the richest self-made women in American history, both black. And for over a century, America pretended they didn't exist. 3. O.W. Gurley, the man who built Black Wall Street. born in 1868, 3 years after slavery ended. Moved to Oklahoma during the land rush. Bought 40 acres in Tulsa and had a vision that terrified white supremacy, a place where black people could build wealth without depending on white businesses that discriminated against them. He sold lots exclusively to black buyers. Opened a rooming house and grocery store. Other black entrepreneurs followed. Within 20 years, Greenwood, just 35 blocks, had transformed into the wealthiest black community in America. Over 300 black-owned businesses, banks, hotels, movie theaters, law offices, a hospital, a bus system, luxury cars cruising the streets, multiple millionaires. In the Jim Crow South, built by people whose parents had been enslaved. Then came May 31st, 1921. A black teenager named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white elevator operator. He didn't do it, but that didn't matter. A white mob of thousands, many deputized by law enforcement, attacked Greenwood with guns, torches, and, according to eyewitnesses, airplanes that dropped incendiary devices on buildings and fleeing families. Over 300 black people murdered, 10,000 left homeless, 35 blocks burned to ash. O.W. Gurley's empire, along with every other black millionaire's holdings in Greenwood, systematically destroyed. Then the city made it nearly impossible for black residents to rebuild by changing fire codes and zoning laws. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. And for 75 years, the Tulsa Race Massacre was completely removed from Oklahoma textbooks. Erased, as if 300 murders and 35 blocks of prosperity never existed. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that black wealth had existed and had been stolen. 4. Robert Reed Church Sr., the man who survived a bullet and built a bank. Born enslaved in 1839. During the Memphis Massacre of 1866, a white mob shot him in the head and left him for dead. He survived. Then he took $50 and bought his first piece of real estate. By 1912, Church was worth over $1 million, the first black millionaire in the South. He owned saloons, real estate throughout Memphis, and founded Solvent Savings Bank, one of America's first black-owned banks. But his greatest achievement came when Memphis tried to segregate all public spaces and deny black citizens access to parks. Church didn't protest. He didn't beg for inclusion. He spent $100,000 of his own money and built Church Park and Auditorium, a massive complex that became the cultural center of black Memphis. Presidents spoke there. Booker T. Washington spoke there. Church's message was clear. If you exclude us from your world, we'll build a better one ourselves. For decades, history barely mentioned the Church family, because their success undermined every narrative about black people needing white benevolence to survive. They'd done it themselves, with no help, in the face of violent opposition. 5. Mary Ellen Pleasant, the secret millionaire who funded John Brown. Born around 1814, possibly into slavery, possibly free. By the 1850s, she was in San Francisco working as a cook and investor, and secretly one of the wealthiest financiers in the city. Some estimates put her fortune at $30 million in today's money. She used that money to do something extraordinary. She funded John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Yes, that John Brown, the abolitionist who tried to start a slave rebellion. Pleasant gave him $30,000, making her one of the largest financial backers of armed resistance to slavery. After the Civil War, Pleasant sued San Francisco streetcar companies for racial discrimination and won in 1866, 90 years before Rosa Parks. But when she got into a legal battle with a white business partner who betrayed her, white newspapers launched a smear campaign calling her a voodoo queen and a witch. Racist courts sided against her repeatedly. Her fortune was systematically stolen through legal manipulation. By 1904, history had forgotten her almost entirely. The mother of civil rights in California erased. 6. A.G. Gaston, the coal miner who built an empire and housed the movement. Born in a log cabin in 1892 to parents who'd been enslaved. Started with nothing. Sold firewood and peanuts as a child. worked in coal mines as a young man, then built Birmingham's black business empire, insurance company, funeral home chain, motel, bank, multiple other ventures. When he died in 1996, at age 103, he was worth $130 million. But Gaston's story isn't just about wealth, it's about resistance. In 1963, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Birmingham to lead protests, Gaston's motel became headquarters for the entire campaign. Movement leaders stayed there. Strategy sessions happened there. When white terrorists bombed the motel, trying to kill King and destroy the movement, Gaston rebuilt it. He understood that black wealth wasn't just about money. It was about having resources to fight back, provide safe spaces, and fund the struggle for freedom. That's why they tried to erase these stories. Black millionaires weren't just rich. They were dangerous to white supremacy. 7. Biddy Mason, the woman who walked 2,000 miles to freedom, then bought the city. Born enslaved in Mississippi in 1818. In 1848, her master converted to Mormonism and forced Mason to walk 2,000 miles behind his wagon train to California, herding cattle while caring for her 3 daughters. When they arrived in California, a free state, her master tried to move them to Texas to keep them enslaved. Mason sued for her freedom. In 1856, she won. With no education and no resources except her skills as a nurse and midwife, Mason began buying property in Los Angeles. Piece by piece, block by block. By the 1880s, she was one of the wealthiest black landowners in the city, worth over $300,000. She paid property taxes for families about to lose their homes, funded schools and churches, visited prisoners, provided for the poor. When she died in 1891, white Los Angeles tried to bury her in an unmarked grave. For 90 years, her story was forgotten until a historian digging through old property records discovered the truth. Biddy Mason had been one of the most important figures in early Los Angeles history, and the city had deliberately forgotten her. The patterns they don't want you to see. These 7 names are just the beginning. Historians estimate hundreds of black millionaires existed between 1865 and 1930. Their records were destroyed in courthouse fires, race massacres, and deliberate archival purges. The 1921 Tulsa Massacre wasn't unique. Between 1898 and 1923, at least 26 black towns and business districts were destroyed by white mobs, often with government backing. Rosewood, Florida. Wilmington, North Carolina. Elaine, Arkansas. Each time, same pattern. Burn the buildings. Murder the resistors. Steal the land. Erase it from history. The system didn't just steal their wealth, it stole their proof of existence. Because if future generations knew that black Americans had built millionaire empires despite slavery, despite Jim Crow, despite terrorism, then every excuse for the racial wealth gap would collapse. You couldn't say black people just need to work harder, when the evidence shows they did work harder and their work was literally burned to the ground. You couldn't claim black people have no history of business success when the evidence shows they built thriving districts that were systematically destroyed. The erasure wasn't an accident. It was policy. Why this matters now. Every time someone suggests black Americans are responsible for their own poverty, they're repeating a lie built on mass graves and erased history books. Black Americans did build wealth against impossible odds. And when they succeeded, the system destroyed it, then pretended it never existed. The racial wealth gap isn't the result of lack of effort or ability. It's the result of domestic terrorism, legal theft, and historical erasure. Madam C.J. Walker, O.W. Gurley, Robert Reed Church, Mary Ellen Pleasant, Annie Malone, A.G. Gaston, Biddy Mason. Say their names. Share their stories. Learn about the hundreds more who were erased. Because the greatest threat to oppression has always been remembering what they try to make us forget. These 7 people proved that black excellence isn't new. It's been here all along. They just burned the receipts and hoped you'd never ask questions. But now you know, and knowing changes everything.